Collecting for the Next Generation, an examination of the strategies art advisors and financial advisors can provide for individuals who are interested in leaving a lasting legacy through their art collection is presented in partnership with the Association of Professional Art Advisors and our presenting sponsor of EXPO Chicago Northern Trust. Today's panel will be moderated by Wendy Cromwell, the founder and principal of Cromwell Art LLC, a full-service art advisory firm since 2002. Wendy was previously a vice president of Sotheby's and a specialist in contemporary art, a visiting member of the visiting committee of the Smith College Museum of Art, and co-chair of the Contemporary Associates. She is also a member of the International Committee and the Acquisitions Committee of the American Friends of the Israel Museum. In addition to her work as an art advisor, Wendy is an appraiser specializing in contemporary art and photography. She is a member of the Appraisers Association of America, and Wendy is the former president and current board member of the APAA. We could not imagine a better moderator for today's discussion, whom Wendy will now briefly introduce. So please help me in welcoming our panelists. Thank you.
Introduce our panelists. I wanted to point out briefly our president of APAA, the Association of Professional Art Advisors, Joe Houston. So please stand and just wave. And we also are delighted to have with us our executive director, Kim Meyer. Please stand. If you have any questions about APAA, please see either Joe or Kim after our panel. Now, without further ado, I will introduce our panelists. I will start with Elizabeth, who is sitting closest to me. Elizabeth Szancer. Elizabeth is an art advisor, and she is the principal of ESKart LLC. Since 1982, she has provided curatorial and collections management services to private collectors and corporations. Elizabeth is the vice president of the Association of Professional Art Advisors, and she has been a member of the exhibitions committee of the International Center of Photography for many years, in addition to serving on the Empire State Plaza Art Commission. She is a member of the art advisory board of the Fountain Gallery, these are all in New York, which provides opportunities for artists with mental disabilities. In 2011, she curated the 10th anniversary exhibition of the Neue Gallery in New York, the Ronald S. Lauder Collection, selections from the 3rd century BC to 20th century, Germany, Austria, and France. So welcome, Elizabeth. And sitting immediately next to Elizabeth is Evan Beard, who is the U.S. coordinator of Deloitte's Art and Finance practice. He works with family offices, private banks, wealth managers, and art-related businesses. Prior to joining Deloitte, Evan worked in wealth management and diplomacy as an international negotiator. Next to Evan is Kelly Huang, who is an art advisor with Zlot, Buell and Associates in San Francisco. Kelly is also, her firm is a member of the Association of Professional Art Advisors. She is also an independent writer who has contributed to Art 21 magazine, and she has curated group shows in Chicago, where she has lived, and San Francisco. She advises private and corporate clients in all aspects of collecting, from acquisitions to collections management. She is a co-founder of Artadia's San Francisco Council and served as programming chair for SF MoMA's Society for the Encouragement of Contemporary Art. Welcome, Kelly. And next to Kelly is Tim Bresnahan, who is vice president in the Wealth Planning Advisory Services Group at Northern Trust, the sponsor of EXPO. He focuses on philanthropy, art advisory, and planning for LGBT individuals. He is a current member of the board of directors for Rivendell Theater in Chicago, and he is also affiliated with the Chicago Community Trust's Young Professional Advisory Committee, the Donors Forum, the Chicago Council on Planned Giving, and the Point Foundation. So we have a very illustrious group for you today, and we are all very excited to be here to talk to you about our topic today, which is collecting art with a legacy in mind. Excuse me while I get my papers organized. I thought it would be good to take a minute and just ask our audience to get a sense so our questions and answers are directed at your particular interests. Who we have in the audience. So if you would bear with me and maybe give me a show of hands, how many in the audience today are already collecting art and want to become more familiar? Okay, great, with the issues surrounding their collections. That's great. And how many are interested in starting to collect art and want to be prepared for the issues that are going to be coming up once you own art? Okay, that's great. This is helpful information. And I just also want to say that at any point you have a question, raise your hand. We don't need to wait until the end. This is meant to be not just a lecture, but a conversation if time allows. Okay, so we're just gonna get started. Let's start with our first question. Today, panelists, we see an increase in individuals who wish to be proactive and do something with their art collection during their lifetime. A great example of this is Stefan Edlis and Gail Neeson, who recently promised to gift their collection to the Art Institute. I want all of you to kind of take a turn answering, and we'll start with Elizabeth and work our way to the right. What are some of the options for collectors today that wish to proactively manage their art holdings? And what are the benefits to being proactive during your lifetime? Elizabeth. Hello?
I think that the approach that one could take could be multifold, so I think it really depends on where you're at with your collection and the kinds of things that inspire you. But I think what really applies to anybody collecting is to start with a passion and start with some knowledge. Look at a lot of art before you even jump into it, and get some good advice. And which relates to our topic. So I think that if you start collecting, number one, you should keep really careful records of everything you do, and make sure that your records are legally addressed. And so on, and keep tabs of everything you buy and everything that goes along with it, framing, bases, transportation, anything related to that work of art, and keep very careful records. In terms of thinking about the future, that's step number one, but getting involved with a local institution that might share some of the collecting interests that you have could be a good place to start. See what they're doing, get involved, get on a committee. That opens up a lot of doors. It really helps if you get to know the curators and you show an interest in what they're doing. They'll show an interest in what you're doing, and they could be really helpful to you. And other than that, I mean, certainly, I'm all for finding the right, art advisor that can help you as well. But to have an art advisor, you have to get the right one. So that's, I think, a subject that we're going to hit upon a little bit later, where you also need sort of a trio. It's sort of your art advisor, your accountant, and your lawyer. I think that that's really important to get the right advice. But there's a good start on that end.
I completely agree, Elizabeth, and thank you for that. I'd like to say that we've seen a big transition in the last 10 years. And so as we look at the options that you have with your art collections, our clients, they fall into two categories. One are the folks who treat their art like a store of value, a capital asset. These are folks that love art, they have the addiction, they're building magnificent collections, but they actually use it to take art loans against to buy real estate. The American Stock Exchange was bought purely based on a loan against an art collection because the art financing loan was actually cheaper than the real estate loan. We see families with magnificent art collections that have actually formed an art fund around it and basically created a private syndicate around it, which allows them to buy and sell art utilizing a 1031 exchange, which is a way to get better capital gains tax treatment. We see some folks, they're actually building their art collections into basically trusts that they can remain in control of throughout their life and loan their art collection to galleries, and in that way they have control of the art throughout their life, but they're still able to get proper tax treatment against it, etc. The other group, that's the group that is really treating their art as a capital asset, and this has been a trend really that has started only in the last generation. The other group are folks who love collecting art because they want to leave a legacy. And whether that legacy is a personal legacy or a legacy that is a more public legacy, we have our clients that are building museums around their art, and they're starting very early on in the process having conversations with their children on whether you want to be a steward of this art, and if not, starting that discussion of what is the most efficient way to plan to deassess that art so their children aren't left with very large estate planning bills and other types of financial issues along the line. So two types. Folks that treat art like an expressive good and want to leave a legacy, and then the folks who treat it like a capital asset. There's lots of options on either way.
Thank you. So I want to echo a little bit of what Elizabeth was saying. We really encourage our clients to think beyond collecting for themselves. And so we also encourage our clients to become really involved with their local community, especially. And so in our case, we're based in San Francisco, and we encourage our clients to really be active in supporting the SF MoMA and the Berkeley Art Museum, as well as smaller institutions like the Szancer Art Center or the Wadas Institute. And really what they get from that is the sense of being part of this larger community, and the involvement that they can have within is through these interest groups and supporting the museum financially, but also buying works as promised gifts to these institutions, which leaves their own legacy in the community. And also co-owning works, which sometimes comes up for our clients who are really involved. We always encourage our clients to loan their works and their collection to museum shows, not just locally, but internationally, as long as it's a reputable institution or it's an important show and we know the works will be taken care of. It's one way to put your works out there and contribute to something larger than just to your own collection, which is really gratifying to our clients. And that's something, the SF MoMA has been closed for a few years now for renovation, and they're reopening in the spring, and it's going to be a really exciting time for many of our clients because when the museum reopens, they're going to see so many works that they personally own on those walls, and they can see that as a real contribution to the place that they care about so much. And so I think it's really about encouraging our clients, especially our younger clients, to think about what their collection impact can be. Locally and beyond, and we try and encourage that as much as we can.
So I work at Northern Trust. For those of you who aren't aware, we're a large international wealth management firm. And a lot of what we try to do with our clients is align their goals, whether they're short-term goals or long-term goals, with their wealth, right? So if you are looking to fund the purchase of a home in 3 months, you may not want to invest a whole bunch of money for that purchase into the stock market, because as we've seen over the past few months, a lot of volatility. So we are doing more and more to encourage our clients to think about their art as part of their wealth, because it may surprise you in the room. I assume there are a lot of art lovers here and it's top of mind. A lot of clients forget that holdings can be a really important or substantial part of their overall wealth. They're really comfortable talking about stocks and bonds. They're really comfortable talking about closely held business or family business. But they sometimes forget that we also own $4 million worth of art. So I think the most important thing that I could say in terms of proactively thinking about, you as a collector or you as an investor as it relates to your art is having a conversation. And I can bring up a recent client example. Client called me from Missouri. She had an unexpected bump in income this year from the sale of some land to the tune of about $1 million. So she was thinking about doing some charitable giving to offset some of that. Well, when I got on the phone to chat with her, She said, well, I've identified a piece that I want to give to an institution in the Southwest. It's a piece of folk art, so I want to give it there. And I said, oh, that's great. So you've had a conversation with the sort of institution to talk about sort of what the plan is. No. Well, how do you know that they want the piece? Well, they have a great folk art collection, so they're probably going to want it. Okay. Well, that may be true, but it also may not be true. I mean, the museum could be in a different place curatorially over the next year, depends on their plan. They may be looking at different pieces right now instead of folk art that they're trying to focus on. So just the idea for her that a conversation is really necessary in order for her to achieve this short-term goal is really important. And then as we got sort of diving more and more into her own personal story and her art, she realized that she didn't have her documents organized, as you were saying at the very beginning, how important that is. She really wasn't sure where the bill of sale was from this acquisition. She also mentioned she has all this furniture, and she was thinking, maybe I should have this organized and appraised now, because I'm thinking it may be something I want to do charitably with it down the line. So as we're having a conversation, the boxes in her mind are clicking, and I think that's really important. So my takeaway is, have a conversation. It could be with an art advisor, with your estate planning attorney, with your financial advisor. Just start somewhere and see where it goes.
Great example, thank you. Moving right along, I think we can get a little deeper into the nitty-gritties with our next question. At some point, collectors face the prospect of dispersing their art collection. This can be a routine part of estate planning, but sometimes it can happen for unforeseeable reasons, such as divorce, a need to raise funds, or a change in your collecting focus. Panelists, when would you advise your clients to start planning, and what are some basic steps collectors can take to be prepared for different scenarios? So we'll start with you and go the other way.
Oh, sure. So, and I'm going to echo a little bit of what Evan was talking about earlier, that different planning options exist if you're sort of a pure collector or if you're more of an investor. And sometimes we actually see the lines blurring more and more between how our clients really approach their art. They really love it, they feel passionately about it, but they want to be a little bit more, I'd say, proactive and a little bit more strategic about how they own that art. And that's one of the first takeaways I would sort of give to the audience here, is as you're planning for things in your life, whether it's your first piece that you're going to buy, and we'll start there as an example, think about how you're going to own that piece. Is it going to be owned by you individually, or is it going to be owned by an entity? And there are lots of complications that can come with owning a piece of art within an entity, like a family limited partnership, for example. And we don't need to get into the weeds on that, but it's one thing to think about. Or is the art going to be owned by a trust? If so, who is going to be the trustee? Meaning, who is going to be the individual or the institution that has the responsibility for safeguarding that art? Owning the art in trust may be the best solution for you in terms of legacy planning with your family, or it could be a disaster. Depending on, if you put your cousin Mel in charge as trustee, and Mel has no experience, and is not properly insured, and has no clue what a fiduciary is, well, that's probably not going to end well. So we like to think from the very beginning, whether you own 50 pieces of art or you're looking to buy your first piece, think about the hat that you're wearing and how you're going to acquire it. And then second, I would say, what's really important is don't assume. So, up here we've had panelists already talk about how important it is, the conversation, legacy planning, clients are talking to their kids and grandkids about art. That doesn't always happen. In fact, I'd say really forward-thinking conversations about long-term planning with art is the minority with our clients. They are making a lot of assumptions. And it's not a judgment call, they just are. They're either assuming that their kids really want the art, or their grandkids really love the art, and they have no interest in this, mid-century modern furniture collection, or they assume that the kids don't want it, they're looking at charitable organizations, but really, the kids really want the art. And those conversations aren't happening. So I encourage you to think about those two things. What hat are you using to acquire the art? And relatedly, how is the art being acquired by you individually or through some more complex structure? And then don't assume. Talk to your kids, talk to your grandkids, talk to your friends and family members, talk to your charitable donees to make sure they want your stuff. Those are really important conversations to be happening in the beginning.
So our firm We don't do any estate planning or financial planning for our clients, but what we do is we keep very detailed records, and Elizabeth sort of spoke to this earlier, but we try and keep track of every single detail about an artwork that gets acquired through us. So we're tracking all the provenance information, we're tracking exhibition history, ownership history, we're tracking any conservation work that has been done in detail as much as possible. We're updating appraisal values, insurance appraisal values for them every few years, or when the market changes drastically for one of the artists that they collect. And all of this is done with all the paperwork details stored so that we have the full record for every single artwork that's there. And that way, for the family offices that the families work with, or estate planners or accountants, lawyers, etc., that they can always contact us, and we can always have that full record to provide to them. And it is super important because every once in a while there's something that hasn't been acquired through us. It's something acquired before the client started working with our firm, and they're trying to track down information and it's not there, and it leads to trouble because they either have trouble de-assessing it if that's what they want to do, or planning for the future of that work. So it's just super important to keep those records for yourself if you're not working with an advisor, or to find an advisor who provides that full service for you so that you have that backup whenever you need it. That's probably the best that I can do with that question because we don't do those services, but that's the takeaway. Yeah.
Curious whether you, when you initially, let's say the firm initially is in discussions with a client, will you say to them in the beginning, let's talk about your strategy, what your goals are? Do you have conversations like that with your clients where it's not just about, let's help you define a collecting path in terms of the genre you want to pursue, but let's also talk about, how what your goals are in terms of, are you doing this with your kids? Do you have those conversations?
Absolutely, we do. And I think we have a lot of younger clients right now who are just starting out, and that conversation is different from our conversation with our collectors who've been collecting for 20 years. So with the clients who are sort of that older generation who have children who are now in their 20s or 30s, and they're really thinking about the future of their collections and being passed along to their children, it's that conversation of, okay, who owns this work now, and do you think it's going to be passed along to your children, and how do we plan for that, and how do we approach the buying process? Really, that's sort of our approach to it, because we're not doing the financial planning or the estate planning, but we can say, okay, when we're looking at work together, are we sharing it with everybody, or are we sharing it just with you, and how do you want to approach that decision? So there's that, and with the younger clients, we're just starting off. It's really thinking about, what kind of collection are you building? Who are you building that collection for? And they might not be thinking about children yet, but they're thinking about, am I collecting because I want something in my home that I can enjoy, or is it that I want it to be something beyond that? Do I want it to be something that I can share with my community? Is it something that it's really important to be a public collection in some way? So they're thinking about the future in those terms. Mm-hmm.
It's not an easy kind of consideration. A lot of our clients are not thinking of legacy. They want to build a magnificent collection. Maybe it's an addiction. Maybe it's just their interest. But we find that a lot of our clients don't want to have that discussion about death. And so we case it with, do you want a private legacy, keeping it within the family? Let's have the discussion with the children. Do they want to steward this magnificent collection that they may actually not think is all that magnificent? Or do you want to have a more public legacy, and let's start reaching out to museums, let's start reaching out to foundations, let's actually see if there's a demand out there. Will this actually have a more public legacy, and having that real conversation with them? I'll give you two very quick examples. We had a client pass away just last year, and he collected art for 10 years in the 70s, and the kids really paid no attention to it. And so he had a lot of Solowitz and Stellas and works that he almost had forgotten were in a storehouse. And in his mind, he said, okay, we may have $500,000–$600,000 worth of art. It was appraised after the death for $28 million. And suddenly the children who really had absolutely no interest in that collection whatsoever. They were not in the art world, and to them it was a bunch of weird squares on a wall. I mean, this is really avant-garde stuff. And they were hit within, when you die, you have 9 months before you get an estate bill, and you have to go to the IRS art panel, and we're walking them through this process, and boom, a $14 million estate bill's coming your way. So that's one example of, look, even if this was a past interest of yours, suddenly it is going to be, and potentially, a very large piece of your overall asset allocation model. And you really have no choice but to think as early on in the process as you can of what this effect will have on succeeding generations. The second example is a client who unfortunately just passed away. We've been working with him for the last 10 years. Not me personally, but our group. And in the next few months, we're going to have a branded auction at Sotheby's with his choice pieces that will be sent around the world, half in London, half in New York. The works that his children didn't want in the lower tier are sent to 5 different galleries and a few to private treaty sales. And then the rest are going to a local museum, and then a few choice works that are going to stay in the family, split up evenly so the children get a marketability discount on the estate bill. And then we actually used an art loan against the collection to pay off whatever estate taxes were left. Now, this is a bit complex, and most people won't have a collection of that size and nature. But it was a 10-year process to put that plan in place before this gentleman passed away. And I promise you, he will maximize the value tenfold to what the family preceding, just because they didn't view their art just as a passion, but they also recognized that it's a fairly sizable piece of their legacy and their asset allocation. So earlier is better.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I ditto on all that was said before me, and what Kelly was saying. We do that for our clients, and we keep track of all of their art holdings. Almost everything they own is bought through us, but every once in a while they do something on their own. We keep track of that too, and sometimes we're chasing things, so we prefer that they don't do that, but we do keep track of everything, and we manage everything from them, from their exhibition loans to moving things almost every day of the week, around from residence to residence, to framers, to storage warehouses, on and on and on. But what I try to tell people is that it's sort of like your will. You create a will, and maybe a lot of young people don't think about having a will until maybe they have children, where there's some responsibility. And creating a will does not bring on an early demise. So they don't like to talk about death, but if you talk about it in more positive terms, in terms of responsibility, and something that you can change every week if you so choose. So putting something in place doesn't mean it has to be fixed forever. It's definitely something that should be revisited as things change in your life, as people come and go in your life, as tax liabilities change, tax laws change. So that's why you kind of need your team of experts. I once had the occasion to tell a client kind of early on, it was kind of funny in a way, where I asked him about taking care of something of his art collection. He said, I'll just have my secretary do that. And I said, really? You're going to have your secretary do that? When your car breaks down, do you have your secretary, sort of open up and get under the hood there and figure out what's wrong? Do you do that? Because I don't think you would. And the art we're talking about is much more valuable than your car. So maybe you shouldn't have your secretary do that. So it's just something to keep in mind. And then, I'm going to give you a few examples. I worked with a very, 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 very well-known collector who passed away in 1979. I was actually on his curatorial staff way before I went out on my own and creating my own company. And he had a major, major property, and I'm not, since we're on tape, I'm not going to use names. But he left his property to the National Historic Trust. And that took 10 years to settle because the trust didn't want it. Why? Because he didn't leave any kind of funding for the care of that house. He thought, well, they'll just take care of it. So it took a long time. So that speaks to your institution. Find out, do they really want it? What's involved? I mean, and that's amazing for someone of that note that wasn't planned out more carefully. But there are a lot of things that people can do while they're alive to manage their assets when it comes to art, like collateral loans you're talking about, or the 1031 exchanges, depending, those are tricky. But there are other things that one can think about. So, I can give a couple of public examples that I've been involved with, a couple of highlights for me. I was lucky enough to be involved in the negotiation of the purchase of the Klimt de Delbach Bauer that Ronald Lauder purchased for the Neue Galerie. And he had always been interested in that painting when he would visit the Belvedere in Vienna, even as a very young man, and he's now 71. And he knew Maria Altman, he knew her well, and he always said to her, if you're ever lucky enough to get those works restituted, please come to me. Now, he didn't even have the Neue Gallery when this conversation began, and the conversation continued for many years. And she came back to him, but only with the idea that it remain in a public institution. And he said, absolutely. If a work like that gets restituted, it has to be seen by everybody in the whole wide world. And then the idea was that it remain in the U.S. It never gets loaned. It's always on permanent view at the Neue Gallery in New York. And for me, that was a very exciting project to be involved with. I feel really fortunate about that. And recently we came up with another structure that was great, something that we could never do in New York State because it doesn't fall within the structure of the law of New York State. So that is that, and this was publicized, and that's why I can talk about it. About a year ago, a little over a year ago, in Old Master's sale at Sotheby's came up a work, early Renaissance work by an Italian artist named Da Rimini. And Ronald Lauder decided to buy it because he, who had been for many years interested in contemporary art, decided he should go the other way. So we're buying a lot of old masters and antiquities. So the work came up, and he was the successful purchaser. But since it came up in a London sale, an export license had to be applied for, and we didn't know if we would get it. And the way it works is you don't have to pay for the work until you get the export license, and that's a whole other subject. It's not for today, but about that. But anyway, it could be blocked by a UK institution. And after several presentations in the UK, the National Gallery came forward, National Gallery of London came forward and said, you know what, we want to come up with the money to buy that work. Ronald Lauder got into a whole panic. I mean, what does this mean? I'm not going to have my picture. They're going to come up with the money. I bet they're going to come up with the money, and I'm not going to get my painting, and I want my painting, and it's all okay. So actually, he came up with a brilliant concept, and that was that he would donate the funds to the National Gallery so that they could buy the picture. As a result, their tax liability in this purchase was less than his would have been, making the whole price lower. But the stipulation being that he could borrow the picture for his lifetime. So we sat down, I was in the UK in May, and sat down with the lawyers of the National Gallery. We came up with a structure that worked for everybody involved. And it's going to happen. And it was publicized that Ronald Lauder funded the work for the National Gallery, so that's a really nice thing. National Gallery is really happy. The work will be coming shortly to the U.S., where Ronald Lauder can install it in his residence, and the National Gallery has a right to borrow it whenever they choose for Ronald Lauder's lifetime. Now, just in the state of New York, you can't do that. We've talked to the Metropolitan Museum, for example, where a collector purchases a work of art in full by giving the donation of funds. The museum buys the work, then the collector cannot borrow it back. There's a conflict of interest, so you can't do it there. But maybe it depends on your state.
Thank you. That was a
Sorry
fascinating
for
two
going on.
stories.
Sorry for going on.
We want you to go on when it's great stories like that. Now, not obviously. Yes. Question. Can you stand up, please?
It must stay in his residence, and it can't be even moved an iota on the wall once it's installed. And we had to abide by full climatic condition. It was very complicated.
Good
But
question.
it cannot be moved. Yeah.
Excellent question. I mean, these are fascinating stories because they provide a window into a legendary kind of collector who really is setting the pace and inspiring many aspirationally important collectors. Not everybody has that kind of profile. I just comes to mind as Elizabeth was talking about these things that might seem to mere mortals, you know, unattainable kind of strategies and unattainable situations. But on a very practical level, you know, I have encountered situations where I'm shepherding an estate to auction and there are absolutely no records. And it makes, you know, certainly with old master paintings, it wreaks havoc. It can take months, you know, to determine exactly what you're dealing with, and lots of due diligence to make sure that the works have been correctly identified and with correct provenance, which can be an issue for works that come from, you know, not contemporary art, but works that have lived through wars and might have been exposed to situations where they were illegally obtained. Also situations in divorces where clients will hire somebody to evaluate their collection, and one party is more knowledgeable than the other about what the collection is, because sometimes the husband or the wife is more of a determining factor in how collections are made. And you know, I've stressed the importance to clients of having independent appraisals done, not just using one appraiser for both parties. And making sure that, you know, forewarned is forearmed, sort of knowing what you have, even if you're living with art and it's not your passion, it's your spouse's passion. Knowing what's on the walls can be very, very important in situations you never anticipated. So there are lots of reasons why small things and taking an interest, speaking with children matters.
Well,
But,
it also speaks to the fact that it's not intuitive, right? The rules are not intuitive. With charitable giving, with transferring art, I mean, if you get a gift from an artist as opposed to buying the gift, that can have huge implications for you from a tax perspective that a lot of people don't think
Aren't
about,
even aware of.
right? So I think it's just to your point, it's not intuitive, which is why advisors, whether they're art advisors or financial advisors, are so important to the
Well,
conversation.
Thank you. This leads us to our next question, and we are kind of running out of time, so I'd like everybody to be kind of concise in their reply. With all the options that we've discussed today and lots of things that are available to art collectors in the marketplace, given the size of the global art market, building a network of trusted advisors has never really been more important. Since we are here representing the Association of Professional Art Advisors, which is an organization, a membership-based organization that has a commitment to ethical practice in art advisory, a commitment to transparency in working with our clientele, a commitment to having certain qualifications in order to be able to join the organization, I'd like all of our panelists, even those that are not on the APAA team, to comment on what you believe is the sort of the most succinct answer, the value of working with an art advisor. So we're going to start down at the end.
You know, I think not to sound redundant, but there's so much that is not just intuitive to the process. And having an independent art advisor, what we found has been extremely helpful as part of a larger team. So as an example, we have some clients who have some old masterpieces. They wanted to give it to their children, but their kids were in their 20s and lived with roommates and lived in Lincoln Park, and they just weren't comfortable having a Picasso hang in their home. So they worked with not only an estate planning attorney, but an art advisor to move those works into trust and then to lease them back. And the art advisor was a key part of that because they helped the clients pick out specific pieces from the collection that would be appropriate to transfer, and they were able to provide the fair market rental value, which is a totally different thing than an insurance value or a replacement value. So that art advisor was crucial to that process. We couldn't have just used an estate planning attorney, a tax attorney, and a financial advisor or a trust advisor to execute that transaction.
I can speak to why people decide to come to Zlot Buell as art advisors, and I think starting off just saying that the best part of my job and the most important part of our job is really that we are constantly in the know. We're paying attention to every museum exhibition sort of all over the world, every gallery exhibition internationally, and it's our job to really be in the know about it. Read every press release, talk to these artists, talk to these dealers about the work, go on studio visits with artists so that we really understand what that landscape is like at that very moment, and to be able to bring that knowledge then to our clients. And what we are able to do for our clients is really provide access to the contemporary art world. We take our expertise and we are able to, we have all these great relationships with museums and dealers and et cetera, and we're able to have that, that scope of knowledge about an artist's past and what they're working on now, and be able to understand what the best example of that artist's work is, and to be able to present that work to our clients, and to be able to be confident in saying, like, this is the best example, this is really what you should be looking at and planning about. So, passing on that access to our clients is, I think, the most important thing that we can do for them.
So we at Deloitte, we're not art advisors, but we work with a lot of art advisors, and the best we've seen provide 5 things. They need to provide access throughout the art world. They need to be able to have the connoisseurship and the curatorial expertise to build a proper collection based on your own aesthetic interests and objectives. 3, they really need to have an understanding of some of these broader financial issues, the estate planning, the trust structuring. They don't need to be experts in it, but they can't anymore just be purely on the curatorial side. They need to understand some of the consequences of those things. 4, they need to be empathetic. Just like a very good wealth advisor can keep you from being fearful or greedy when markets get choppy, a really good art advisor manages the impulses of their clients. New wealth, diving into this space, there's a lot of fear. After this talk, you'll go out there, you'll see a lot of hedge fund guys, you'll see private equity guys. They have the fear of God in them right now. They feel like they're very nervous that if I buy this, I'm being taken for a ride. I don't really understand this contemporary art market. You need an advisor that can manage those emotions and help them understand what this ecosystem actually is. And then finally, a really good art advisor needs to actually have clarity around the fiduciary responsibilities that he or she owes you. If we see a big pullback in the art market, you're going to see a lot of lawsuits based on unclear fiduciary responsibilities of art advisors to clients. Not APAA art advisors, but we've seen some really bad artist-client contracts. You need to make absolutely sure your art advisor is acting in your best interest. They're not on two sides of the deal. They're not dealing plus collecting. And so just make sure it's absolutely clear what the fiduciary responsibilities of that art advisor is to you. If they cover those 5 things, which a lot of them do, those are the folks we've worked with that we are very, very confident in.
I could just add one thing based on what you said. Our firm works with a lot of young and new collectors at this point, and one thing that we always talk about when we first begin that relationship is do not rush into buying anything, actually, and we're art advisors, but it's really important to take the time, figure out what you want to focus on, what are you personally drawn to, what is important to you, what do you want that collection to look like, and we tell our clients, don't buy anything for a year, go out there, come with us, let's look at art, let's really be serious about this, let's look at catalogs, let's read things together, and then you can make those decisions, because you really want to start off on the right foot and be really focused and really start to understand yourself and what you're interested in, but also ultimately you're trying to build a collection and not just buy art.
Well, I'm going to keep this very brief because my colleagues here on the panel have really, outlined why and what. But I just want to say, you could call an art advisor and you could ask her or him, can you provide those 5 things? And many of them out there are going to say, sure, I can. So you have to make sure they have a track record to do that. So I would say really, be an investigator. Check out, do they really have the track record to provide those things? Do they understand what that really means? And it might mean that you interview a few people and that you check them out. You call maybe one of us on this panel and say, have you heard of so-and-so? Have you had experience with this person? You can call APAA. So there are ways of getting to the right people. And there are ways that you could really make a bad mistake in thinking, I need an art advisor, but you hire the wrong one.
Right, and that to further what Elizabeth said, one of the best ways to do this is to speak with, if you're involved in a museum, speak with the curatorial team, see if they've heard of this person, or if you have a local dealer and you've been talking to that dealer about art, who's a reputable art dealer, have a conversation, because chances are if somebody has a track record, it's a very small world in a way. They will have heard of that person. So I agree wholeheartedly with everybody. Now, we had one more question for you today, but unfortunately we're out of time. We were going to discuss art as an asset class and what everybody's feelings are about that, which could really be a whole other panel, and I believe it is at 4 o'clock. So if you are really dying to hear more on that subject, please come back at 4 o'clock, because a very experienced art collector here from Chicago will be speaking on that subject along with other people. If you have any questions for us, we're ready. Go ahead. Please stand. Please stand. For art advisors or for all of us on the panel? Well, I'm happy to answer that question. Art advisors can work in a variety of different ways, and there really is no industry standard. Art advisors can work on retainer with their clients, which is a mutually agreed on number. It can be based on an annual budget. It can be based on a number of hours that are assumed. Art advisors can also work on an hourly basis, and it can be scaled depending on who you're dealing with within the firm. Art advisors can also work on a commission basis, where they're charging a commission based on the cost of the art, and it can be even a combination of those things. I think the main point is that an art advisor should feel very comfortable talking with you about how they charge, and that it should be an extremely transparent discussion and a transparent billing process, so that there is absolutely no confusion about how the advisor is being compensated and what you as the client are paying to acquire a work of art. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, that's exactly how we work, and it is different based on the client and where they are in their collecting, whether it's retainer or hourly, and if it's a corporate collection versus a private collection. And I would say, with transparency, that is the most important thing. There are a lot of art advisors out there now who take a commission from a gallery, and you want to be able to understand what's happening behind the scenes, and the best art advisors aren't going to be doing that. So, make sure there's transparency in that process.
We have a microphone here if anyone has another question.
I see a question. Hi.
One moment.
Hi. First, thank you all so much for this great conversation and dialogue. So most of the artworks that have sort of been discussed or featured in this conversation are more sort of standard, typical, traditional works. And one of the things that I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts on are sort of quote-unquote new media works. And the idea of determining catalogs and sort of keeping records of these exchanges, particularly as that relates to asset planning for some of your clients.
So you're speaking to works that exist on a chip.
Yeah, so new media works that have been either transferred digitally to film, from film, or traditionally exist only in new digital media.
I don't understand why that would be a separate discussion. Do you have a feeling of why that would be a separate discussion as an asset?
I'm not sure why it would be a separate discussion, but one thing I can say is that, you know, with these types of new media works or performance works or ephemeral works, that the artist, what they're doing is providing a certificate of authenticity, and that becomes the artwork that you pass along. And so when you're doing your planning, you can write that into your plan. And then, you know, there are a lot of conservation people involved in these discussions nowadays, and we're talking about video and film and ephemeral materials. And I think those discussions are kind of continuously happening on like what happens when that material breaks down, or what, you know, how can you access more materials like light bulbs, things like
right.
that.
I mean, I think due diligence plays a really strong role in this. I recently helped a client to acquire a work of art that existed on a chip, and we had a letter that was provided to us by the artist studio that stated that this is an artist of major international repute, and it stated that he had established a foundation to preserve his works after his death, and that are holding the, you know, certificate of authenticity or the, you know, intellectual copyright for the work itself was going to be the value of the work, which you keep it in a safe as opposed to somewhere where it could, you know, be exposed to fire or whatever, and keep multiple copies of it, keep a copy in the cloud, and always, you know, we always have access for no extra fee to upgraded technology. What we don't have access to is upgraded screens. So as the new screens are made available, that is the purchaser of the owner of the art bears the cost of changing the technology that way. But I also think that museums are kind of in the forefront of keeping digital copies of works that exist in media. And so, like, you would turn to a conservator for an old master painting and get the expertise from the leading expert in that field. You do have access as a collector to expertise in conservation departments about how to handle preserving the life of that artwork.
It's an important issue, though. In terms of title and who has title to a work, new media has caused a lot of issues. We had a client who had title to an Ives Klein experience from 1970 or 60, whatever, and there was no work of art. There was nothing. It was an experience that happened in Paris. Ives Klein said if you were there at this experience, you own a piece of it. And he had, and this is very, and he had a document stating he was part of that experiment or experience. And he bought this document at auction in Paris at the Hotel Drouot back in the late 70s. And the IRS Art Committee was racking themselves over, we don't actually have a work of art here. We have an ephemeral idea, an experience that happened 30 years ago, but it's actually worth a couple $100,000. So this is very interesting things, and there's lawyers right now sort of racking their minds over some of the title issues on who has good title, and so there's lots of interesting legal writings on this right now, but it's something to keep an eye on.
We have time for one more question. Sorry, can you use the mic?
Wait, what's that?
Talking about very major collections and high end. I collect a lot of artists and represent a lot of artists who are alive but are still in many museums across the country and Europe. How do you go around appraising them? I ask them.
Well, if
But
these are
I
artists,
really want to know long term what value of their work is.
are these artists who have public auction records for their work?
They have sold their work, yes. I mean, not public auction.
Not public auction.
No, they sell to museums, or they have museums, or they sell to
Well, there are
to
two
galleries.
appraisal organizations, AAA, Association of American Appraisers, and ASA, American Society of Appraisers, and they both will refer you to qualified appraisers who can help you determine the value of the work.
And also in regards to questions, I know you're talking about trusts and things like that, which is a very nice idea. I'm doing sculpture gardens and building a museum and an art residency program, which obviously has to go into a nonprofit. Would you recommend that? And is that the way you do it?
Well, it sort of depends on what the structure of the organization is, right, and what you're doing. For art purposes, when you're gifting art to an organization, and if you're the individual giving it, there can be some different motivations for why. It could be to support something that is more sort of avant-garde or cutting edge, and you may not care as much about the tax deductibility of giving that piece away. But if you're concerned about being able to deduct that gift from your personal income tax, individual income taxes, there are some rules that come into play, like the related use rule, right? The art has to be related to that charitable organization's mission. So I think you have to think through, one, what is the structure of your organization? Is it going to be a pure nonprofit, a public charity, or is it going to be more of an operating foundation, which is sort of like a public charity and it has some of the better deductibility rules, but there are specific rules you have to follow in terms of the programmatic work that you're doing as an operating foundation. So my advice to you is to meet with an attorney who specializes in the nonprofit sector, and get some advice before you go too far down the path and you realize the structure you're putting in place maybe is not the best one for your goals.
Completely agree.
Very much. We're thrilled to be able to present this panel. We want to thank EXPO Chicago, Northern Trust, our panelists, and we hope you've learned something today.